The first time I noticed the wild onions was by accident. I was setting up camp in a clearing off the Appalachian foothills, my tent pitched near a quiet stream lined with sycamores. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked soil and crushed leaves, and as I knelt to gather firewood, a tuft of green shoots caught my eye. They looked like the scallions from the farmer's market back home, but thinner, with a faint purple at the base. I bent closer, rubbed one between my fingers, and the smell that rose up made me smile. Sharp, fresh, unmistakably onion. I'd always liked to think of myself as an amateur naturalist, but truthfully, I'd only ever read about identifying edible plants. Now, in that hush of late afternoon, I felt an unfamiliar thrill. Maybe I could learn for real. I started noticing everything after that. The pale green of chickweed creeping across the forest floor. The dimpled leaves of violets hiding under fallen logs. Even the mushrooms, small orange caps shining after a night of rain, seemed to beckon for closer study. I pulled out my old field guide, its pages warped from humidity, and tried matching pictures to the living things around me. But the drawings never quite matched, and the words were cautious, maybe confused with toxic species. I decided to admire instead of taste. The forest felt richer when I looked this way, each plant carrying a quiet story I only half understood. That evening, while I was poking at the fire, a voice startled me. "You looking for ramps?" it said. Out of the dim came a man about my father's age, wearing a canvas hat and carrying a small woven basket. His name was Walter, a local who lived down near the valley road. He'd seen my tent from the trail and wandered over, curious. When I told him I was trying to learn about edible plants, he chuckled. "Well, you picked the right spot and the wrong season," he said, sitting on a stump. "Spring's for ramps, summer's for berries, fall's for mushrooms, if you know which ones won't make you see angels." He pointed to the onions I'd found earlier. "Those there are wild onions, sure enough. Safe as anything, long as you can smell that bite. But you see that over there?" Chorus of crickets, thinking how the forest felt different now. Not just a backdrop for adventure, but a living teacher, waiting for those who bothered to listen. Morning came with the slow silver light of mist rolling through the trees. I brewed coffee over the coals, the steam curling into the cool air, and found myself listening for Walter's footsteps on the trail. Instead, there was only the steady rhythm of dripping leaves and the soft creak of my mug as I lifted it. I decided to wander, notebook in hand, marking each plant I thought I could name. Jewelweed near the water, wild mint where the ground stayed damp, a mushroom that looked exactly like a chanterelle, golden, ridged, and growing from moss. I hesitated, remembering Walter's warning. If you're not sure, let it be. I sketched it instead. By late morning, I found his boot prints leading towards the meadow beyond the ridge. I followed them and found him crouched beside a fallen log, tapping the cap of a brown mushroom with his pocket knife. "You came back," he said, not looking up. "Good. Curiosity's the start of every real education." He handed me the mushroom, explaining how the gills ran down the stem instead of stopping short, how the smell was faintly like almonds. "That's an oyster mushroom. Edible, but only if it's clean and fresh. You see bugs in the gills, toss it. Let them have it instead." We spent the day wandering together, him moving at a steady, patient pace, me trying to keep up and remember every name. He talked about foraging like some folks talk about prayer. The forest was a kind of church, he said, and the offerings went both ways. You take too much, the woods grow quiet. But take what's given and leave a gift, seed, water, even your care, and she keeps feeding you. When we stopped for lunch, he pulled from his basket a small handful of greens, some mushrooms, and a bit of venison jerky. "You ever eat from the forest before?" he asked. I shook my head. Then today's your first communion. We cooked together on a flat stone over the fire, mushrooms sizzling, greens wilting, the scent filling the clearing with something wild and clean. I took a cautious bite. It was simple, earth back, whispering its story through leaf and stem. Walter finally broke the silence. "You keep learning," he said softly. "One day, you won't just walk through these woods. You'll belong to them." That night, clouds gathered low and heavy, and the forest darkened early. I built a small fire beneath the overhang of a leaning rock, where I'd moved my tent to stay dry. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine sap. As rain began to fall, I thought about Walter's words, about belonging to the woods. I'd always loved nature, but mostly as an observer, an admirer from the edges. Learning its language, though, its flavors, its risks, its quiet generosity, felt like being invited into an ancient conversation I'd never realized I could join. When the rain eased, I walked to the stream to fetch water. The moon had slipped behind the clouds, but the world still glimmered faintly from the soaked leaves and moss. Something pale caught my eye. A cluster of mushrooms, glowing faintly at the base of a rotting log. I knelt, heart quickening. "Jack-o'-lanterns," I murmured, recalling the picture from my guide. Beautiful, deadly, and unmistakable. The bioluminescence was faint but real, a ghostly reminder of how wonder and danger shared the same roots. I smiled at the irony. Nature's warnings, I realized, were never cruel, just honest. By morning, the rain had cleared. Mist drifted like breath between the trees, and sunlight laced through the canopy in golden beams. Walter appeared again, carrying a bundle wrapped in burlap. "Figured you might want to see something," he said. We hiked uphill for what felt like an hour, passing through stands of oak and maple until the air grew sweeter with the scent of damp soil and wild mint. He stopped at a clearing filled with plants waist high, their purple blossoms trembling in the light breeze. "Milkweed," he said. "Poisonous when raw, but if you boil it right, it's a feast. Monarchs depend on it too. Teaches you something about balance, what kills a sprig of dried sage. Burn that before you leave," he said. "It's how you say thank you." Then, with a simple nod, he disappeared into the trees as quietly as he'd come. I sat by the fire long after he was gone, the sage between my fingers, feeling the weight and warmth of what he'd shared, not just knowledge, but belonging. The next morning, the forest seemed to hum with quiet life. Every leaf glistened with dew, and the air was cool, washed clean by the night's rain. I decided to stay one more day before heading back, not ready to let go of the rhythm I'd found. I walked the ridge trail Walter had shown me, basket in hand, the sunlight dappling the ground in shifting patches. Now, I could recognize more than I ever imagined. Spicebush with its peppery scent, the tall stalks of goldenrod buzzing with bees, the silvery leaves of mugwort lining the path like a soft border. Each plant felt like a familiar face, one I'd finally learned to greet by name. Down near the stream, I stopped to rest beside a stand of cattails. Their brown heads had gone to fluff, swaying slightly in the breeze. Walter's voice echoed in my mind. "You can eat the roots, boil 'em like potatoes." I knelt, ran my hand through the cool water, and watched the sunlight dance across its ripples. This wasn't just scenery anymore, it was sustenance, medicine, memory. I realized that every patch of ground I'd once passed without thought was, in truth, a library. Not of words, but of smells, textures and tastes, each page alive and whispering. Later in the afternoon, I gathered what Walter called a teaching meal. Dandelion greens, a handful of violet leaves, a few late-season blackberries, and some mushrooms he'd helped me identify the day before. I cooked them slowly in a tin pot over the fire, stirring with a stick, the smell earthy and rich. I ate with gratitude, not for the flavour, but for what it represented, a connection not taken for granted. I could feel the energy of the woods in every bite. It wasn't filling like a store-bought meal, but it nourished something else entirely. Given me on the coals. The smoke curled upward, thin and pale, carrying its soft, herbal scent into the night. "Thank you," I whispered, not just to Walter, but to the woods themselves, for their patience, for their lessons, for letting me belong, even briefly. Morning broke in a slow shimmer of gold through the mist, the kind of dawn that makes you stop mid-breath and just watch. The fire had burned down to faint red coals, and the air was cool enough that I could see my breath curl upward in small ghosts. The scent of the sage still lingered faintly, mingling with wood smoke and damp earth. I sat with my tin cup of coffee, staring at the forest, as if seeing it for the first time. Every tree, every ripple of birdsong felt familiar now, not because I had conquered it, but because I had finally listened. When I packed up camp, I did it slowly, folding the tent with care, brushing away pine needles rather than shaking them off. The forest deserved gentleness. Before leaving, I walked to the stream one last time. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. I knelt, dipped my hands in, and let it run over my fingers. "I'll be back," I murmured. It wasn't a promise made out of adventure, but gratitude. Some part of me already knew I'd never see the world the same way again. The hike back toward the trailhead was quiet. Sunlight broke through the canopy in warm shafts, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny seeds. I recognized the plants along the way now, the wild ginger hidden in shadow, the nodding heads of goldenrod, even a lone puffball mushroom bursting with spores when I brushed past. Each one was a teacher in its own right, a reminder that life here didn't need my admiration, it only asked my respect. Near the end of the trail, I caught sight of Walter again. He was standing by the path with his basket half full, hat pulled low against the sun. "Heading out?" he asked. I nodded. "For now," I said, "but I'll be back when the ramps are up." He smiled, that slow mirror, mud-streaked, sunburned, and grinning. I thought of how easy it is to see nature as something separate, something to visit. But understanding it, really knowing it, changes you. It teaches you that belonging isn't claimed by presence. It's earned through care, attention, and humility. And as the forest faded behind me, I realized that every step I'd taken there wasn't about finding food or learning names. It was about finding my place among all living things.